Hello and welcome to episode 178 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers and find out how they got into the industry, as well as getting as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've got a great back catalogue of guests, including last week, someone that's very good friends with this week's guest, as we found out when we were recording this podcast.
Yeah, that's right. This week we are chatting with the wonderful Ian Moore, who is he's had a kind of variety of jobs. Started off as a stand-up. I think, as he says, he actually writes standing up.
Which was interesting.
He then moved into the world of TV and radio work. He's done a lot of stuff on. He's written comedy memoirs. He's now moved into the cozy crime genre, and now he's got a dark crime thriller coming out. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and as we'll hear on the podcast, he's sort of ended up exactly where he wished he would be, living in sort of rural France.
Where a lot of us wish they were.
Yeah, exactly. Writing books, which is what his 18-year-old self wished for himself. So yeah, I suppose he's achieved what many of us can't.
Living the dream.
Exactly. But no, it's a great episode, and yeah, he is, as I mentioned there, he mentions that he's very good friends with Queeve McDonnell, who was our guest last week as well, so do listen to that episode if you haven't already. But we'll get straight into this one after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
I always start the podcast with the question, did you always want to be a writer? Because, and with you, I don't know if that was the case, because you obviously moved into comedy as well, but did you always have that ambition to write ultimately?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was, my first ambition was I wanted to be a writer-director, a film writer-director. Okay. I wanted to be Woody Allen, basically. Not the whole way, obviously. That kind of writer-director ambition. And from there, I was trying to write stand-up for other people, and it just didn't work. It just didn't. In the end, you end up going through so many different people that whatever the joke was to start with has been completely filtered and watered down, and it just seemed, a rigmarole to try and do that. So I went to see a comedy show with a friend, and basically we came out of this comedy show, and she said, "What did you think of that?" And I'd never been to live stand-up before. Mm-hmm. She said, "What did you think of that?" And I was typical typical bloke in his mid-20s just went, yeah, I could do that. And she rang me up about a month later and said, all right, then put your money where your mouth is. And it was a case of literally being thrown in to do stand-up because I wanted to write, in a sense. That was my one outlet for it, that I could, certainly at that point, that I had. The thing then is that if you're going to do stand-up, as with almost everything, it's all encompassing. You can't sort of just play at it.
Mm-hmm.
So stand-up took control. It was my full-time job, and all my writing energies went onto that. You know, there wasn't. It just felt like there was no, because I wasn't a natural. I wouldn't have classed myself as a natural performer, so I had to kind of work harder at all the aspects of it, not just the writing.
Yeah.
So it just went from there, you know. And when I wrote, we moved to France nearly 20 years ago, and after about 8 years here, I finally caved in and did that thing I said I would never do, which is English bloke moves abroad and writes about his family, which is exactly what I did. Trying desperately hawking my family around. And so those it came from there. And the longer I was doing stand up, the more traveling I was doing and being away from home, the more I wanted to be at home, and that outlet was always going to be, hopefully, the hope was that it would always be writing,
mm-hmm.
books, certainly.
And when you're doing stand up, or when you were doing stand up, was it something that you said you're not by nature a natural performer? Did you have to craft the jokes, writing them down and things like that, or is it something that you instinctively do once you're actually up there?
I think, well, there's a two-step process to that. Is that I became good at the performing. The more you do it, you can learn the tricks of performance. But also by that point as well, I developed a way of writing stand-up, which was literally to stand up. I would write standing up. I've got this kind of gabled office that I'm in now, and it's got chalkboards on the side. So I would write and walk at the same time as if I was on stage, so that you'd have the rhythm of the material would develop a lot quicker than if I wrote something and then had to go and perform it. Mm-hmm. So it was literally, I write stand up, so I'm standing up. It seems as obvious as that. But I think one of the things I noticed was during lockdown, when we were doing comedy on Zoom, which, you know, apart from the fact that I didn't have to travel, was a fairly dreadful idea. But I noticed that a lot of stand-ups were, in fact, all the stand-ups were sitting down, which is, and still doing the same material.
Yeah.
But it didn't have it didn't look right. Mm-hmm. So I always stood up, and that's how I write as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wondered, when it comes to stand up, as you know, as opposed to writing novels, which we'll get to shortly, but when you're writing your stand up material, you know, how do you test that? How do you know if it's working in edits? Because do you test on a small group, and you're thinking, I'm not getting many laughs, I need to tweak this. No, right?
It's really just a case of going on stage, and that's right. the only test you have. There is no other way of doing it. You just have to run it out on stage. There's a general rule that if you've done something 3 times and it hasn't worked, it's never going to work. That's the kind of thing that stand-ups look at. You know, well, I've given it 3 goes, it's not going. Another rule I always had was that if I couldn't remember the material, then it was not good enough. Mm-hmm. You know, in my own head, I was sort of subconsciously telling myself that this just isn't good enough because my brain isn't picking it up at all.
Yeah.
But apart from just road testing it in front of 400 drunks in Manchester on a midnight on a Saturday night, there really is no alternative.
I mean, you get immediate feedback at least there.
You certainly do. I mean, and that was the thing I found quite hard to adjust to with publishing. Is that obviously, like you say, I'm used to getting feedback within 0.4 of a second. It's either thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah.
Whereas you're waiting in publishing, you're waiting for months. That was a really difficult thing to try and cope with.
I mean, and so I'm assuming, did all of this give you this taste for writing? You know, the process, etc. You wanted to move into fiction writing. What was it that you started off wanting to go into film, and then you kind of went to stand up, and then at what point do you think actually fiction writing is where I'd like to go into?
I think when I realised that I'd had enough travelling and enough, I didn't see myself as being patient enough to go through the collaborative process of filmmaking. So it was really just a decision how I have these certain set of skills. How can I not have to go out? So how can I transfer these skills into some kind of money-making exercise without ever leaving my house? Basically, it does boil down to that. I mean, I had ideas that I wanted to do, but a lot of it was, please just don't put me on another plane.
Yeah.
I'm actually flying to Vienna tomorrow to host the World Theme Park Awards, and I just don't want to go. I just do not want to.
Sorry to hear that.
And am I right in saying that before you got to Death and Croissants, which we'll get to shortly, but you'd written a darker novel, a darker thriller first? Is that right?
Well, that's the one that's coming out in October. I self-published when it was certainly before I started writing the Death and Croissants series. I self-published it because I'd seen a very good friend of mine, Queve McDonald, C.K. McDonald, who is something of a self-publishing phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I'd seen him be very successful with it, and I hadn't got anywhere with publishers. So I've self-published mine and didn't realize Queve failed to tell me, he's a very good mate, but he failed to tell me that you have to spend as much effort in marketing as you do in the writing. And the writing's almost, not the most important part. So I withdrew it from sale after a few weeks because I can't be doing with this. I just can't be doing with this. And then that was when I came up with the idea of doing the cozy comedy stuff. I thought I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read, and it was kind of I hadn't got anywhere with the serious crime or the darker crime. The family memoir stuff was fun to do, but I got to the point where I was trying to shove my family into situations so it would make good written anecdotes, which is not the idea at all. So yeah, that's I literally, the idea was, what would I want to read now? And at that time, this was 2019. 2019, yeah, it would have been early 2019. I just thought, well, I write comedy, I write good comedy. I'm living in the Loire Valley. I've just opened a B&B, a posh B&B, which is all the stuff that the main character Richard does. And the idea of having the B&B as a centre of a kind of cozy comedy was, do you know what? Partly it was because I hated running the B&B, and rather than actually physically murder my guests, I did it in a literary fashion. Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, with that one then, with Death and Croissants, how did you find it easier then to get a publisher, to get an agent, and get picked up with that then?
I did. I was very lucky. I sent out a raft of synopsis and covering letters and whatnot, and my agent Bill Goodall got back to me pretty sharply, actually. And but then 2000. I'm trying to think what year it was. Everything's just a blur for a few years. But then he got back to me very quickly, and there were connections with the publishing company that not Summersdale, it's Farrago, who published Death and Croissants. One of their in-house editors I also knew from the time that I'd published the memoirs, so there was a connection there as well. And I just got, incredibly lucky, and things started happening fairly quickly. And signed initially to a 3-book deal, and then signed pretty quickly, shortly after that, another 3-book deal on top. So, really, it just one of those things where it seems when you kind of articulate it like that, it seems like, well, this is easy. I just stepped straight into this. And when in actual fact, this has been 30 years in the making. It feels like everything was right at that time, but it has been, a long, long time coming. But that's partly my own laziness, really.
But I mean, it had been very successful, and as you say, you've gotten multiple book deals. You've written a couple of a shorter story as well. How, I guess I just want to ask, how do you find writing a series like that? Is it, compared to writing your previous work and your stand up, is it something you enjoy, that kind of being able to have 2, 3, 4 books to dive into a character, that kind of time?
It is really enjoyable. I think with the first one, with Death and Croissants, I spent a long time developing the main characters and the kind of cast of characters. Whereas with the subsequent ones, it's been more plot, because the characters were largely established. I mean, you have got the characters do change slightly as they have to do, as we all do. So fictional characters are no different from us. They still have to grow and change and adapt. But I really enjoy coming up with ideas for that, because it can be with a cozy comedy, you can really just sort of let yourself, just that's the phrase I use with I just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks after a while. Because there's just, some of these things that happen are quite absurd and very knockabout, but they're great fun to create.
And as you've said, they're categorized in this genre of cozy comedy, cozy crime type stories, which are very in vogue at the moment. I mean, what does that categorization mean to you? How, when people talk about that, what do you think?
I'm becoming less clear on what cozy comedy is and stands for the more I have a conversation. Somebody flagged up an article for me this weekend. It was written on the 22nd of the BBC. I don't know if you've seen it, but they talk about the phenomena of cozy crime as if it hasn't been around for about 70 years. It's and then the other people saying, it's I think there was a commentator who said it was all twee and insipid. And I don't know where the rules of cozy crime come, because you have Janice Hallett, who is classed as cozy crime, and they're not. For me, they're not cozy crime.
No, I wouldn't class them as.
But she is being classed as cozy, you see, and she, I mean, her books are phenomenal. They're so clever. I'm a real fanboy for Janice Hallett. She's fantastic. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you have talking cats solving cases. Well, that's very different to the Alperton Angels, and yet it's all classed apparently in this catch-all term of cozy.
And the marketing is all kind of similar, isn't it? Kind of the same. Like the look of the front covers are obviously kind of like they're in that, definitely in that same marketing sphere of.
Absolutely, and I think people have kind of, rather than actually read the books and giving them a genre, they're just looking at the covers and going, well, that must be that.
Totally, I think that's right.
I did like a book fair here in France, where they asked me to do a lecture on what constituted cozy comedy, and I made it up, frankly. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the rules are. I said, the murders take place off screen, as it were. You don't see any gore or violence or forensic detail. They're generally amateur sleuths. And then I said to this French audience, I said, also, there's no sex. and that's when they all went, so it's English. So so I don't know what labels you can give it, but everybody seems to have different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and so your new book, though, as you alluded to earlier, is a darker one, The Man Who Didn't Burn. And I didn't realize this was the one that you had previously self-published. So I mean, before we talk about that, do you want to tell us a bit about what it's about?
Yeah, it's called The Man Who Didn't Burn, and it's still set in France. It's I'll give you the main character is a man called Mathieu Lombard, and he's a juge d'instruction. So he's an investigating magistrate. The French system is very different from the English system in that an investigating magistrate is a judge who controls the police investigation. He's basically in charge of the police.
Mm-hmm.
And that is his role in this. And normally they're kind of in culture, they've been kind of stuffy figures, a bit aloof, and always behind their desks rather than getting in the way of the police. I wanted somebody who wanted to get in the way of the police. I wanted a real hands-on kind of character that would be different from the role that he's supposed to have. And the other thing is he's half English and half French. So when there's a murder of an English expat, retired English expat teacher in a local village, he's called on to investigate. But because he's half English and half French, the English don't trust him because he's partly French, and the French don't trust him because he's partly English. Mm-hmm. So there's that. Where the comedy came from in the cozy stuff was the stereotypes of very English Richard playing against a very French Valerie. Mm-hmm. Where Mathieu Lombard has that conflict, but it's internal. He doesn't really know who he is, so he's kind of trying to work out that, really, as well as solve this case. And he's just he's a big crossroads in his life because his wife has just died as well. So he's literally finding himself as well as trying to find the killer as well.
And did it change a lot between the version you self-published to this version of it then?
Yes. it's better. It's had a lot of surgery to just to make it flow better, and I'm a better writer now than I was 6 years ago. So there's been quite a few changes, characters dropped, just to give it a little bit more pace. I really like the idea of European police fiction because it is at a slower pace. Europe is at a slower pace. It's just how they work. I mean, if you look at Aurelio Zen, if you look at Commissario Brunetti, Donna Leon's, and the Fred Varga novels, which are just fantastic. It is at a different pace, and I wanted to keep that slower pace of. I mean, we're in rural France, so nobody runs around.
Yeah,
they just run out of cheese.
and was it what was it that made you want to, or made you think this book, although I tried with it prior at the very start, there's something here. This is the one I want to go back to give it a second shot.
I was always really fascinated with the idea of an investigator who's very different to what we know of investigators in the UK, and I still believe that there was something there. So I basically showed it to Bill, my agent, and he said, "Well, we could definitely do something with this. It needs work, but we'll do it." And that's where it came from. Again, I think because of the success of the cozies, people were willing to take a gamble on me because I have something now of a following. So, well, we'll see. We'll see if I do or not.
Well, I was actually going to ask about that because, from other authors that we've had on, there's often, it seems, a pressure from a publisher to say, you're known in this field. This is what people read you for. And they're reluctant to let you go off and change tack, essentially. So, I mean, did you have any difficulty with that sort of thing?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite. Because the new one, The Man Who Didn't Burn is published by Duckworth, and Farrago, who published the Cosies, are an imprint of Duckworth. So it was them encouraging me to do that because they liked the story. And I must stress that it's not really noir. It's not heavy to that point. It's just not light. I mean, there's still elements of humor in it because there are elements of humor in anything in life, no matter what's gone on.
Yeah.
But this is much more. My wife thinks this is. I'm more Lombard than I am Richard, which is a relief because Richard's a bumbling fool. But it's just a more serious look at the nature of, like I say, identity and expat communities, and it's something that I'm very interested in, obviously, because I mean I'm not in an expat community. We avoid anybody else who's English around here. But it's just that kind of why people go somewhere different and how do they adapt and all of that is all stuff that's explored.
Did you have any problems with the fact that it had been out there, it had been released for a short while? You know, because we've definitely heard people say, well, if it's been released already, we don't want anything to do with it because it's already had its chance, blah, blah. But was there any talk of that? Or were they quite happy to put it out?
No, I think because it sold so badly because I was not willing to put any marketing in it. I'm not.
The good news is it sold so badly we can work with
exactly. I put no effort into pushing it at all. That I don't think enough people have read it to create a stink. So I think we're all right on that score.
And is the intention for that to become a series as well, then?
Yeah, I'm writing the second one. I'm halfway through writing the second one now, called Dead Behind the Eyes. So yeah, definitely. I mean, my mood wavers. Sometimes I really enjoy the kind of breezy aspect of writing a cozy because it does flow a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
But I really enjoy the challenge of writing something that is more serious and that is slightly away. Although I've said Lombard's like me, the situations that he gets into, the nature of grief, all of that stuff, I'm exploring for myself. Whereas, with Richard and Valerie, that's once you've got the plot, it's jokes.
Yeah.
So they're very different to write. I'm enjoying writing the second one now.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your writing process like itself? Do you have like a set routine that you try to stick to? And is it similar in the way that you used to write your stand-up, or is it night and day different?
No, it's very different to stand-up because what I always found with stand-up is that a very sort of fertile time for writing stand-up is just after you've done a gig because your head's in that kind of space. Whereas with the fiction, I'm an early riser and I'll write until about lunchtime, and then I'll do some editing, do some plotting, do some other stuff. But it's a very different process, which is a relief because there's a kind of pressure with writing stand-up. It's like you were saying earlier, how do you know if it's funny or not? And you can spend hours on something and it just turn out to be rubbish. Mm-hmm. And you just think, well, I've kind of wasted my time. Whereas with this, I know I can see the end. I can see where I'm going, and there is a kind of linear process to it.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean that you'll plot out your stories beforehand? You outline them? And
I do to a large extent, but it changes. It changes inevitably. It changes with different reactions. The reaction that you'd initially planned for a character now seems out of character. I'm actually halfway through writing the second one now, and I've stopped and it's now a Word document that's been sent to my Kindle, and I'm going to read that for the next few days and see if what I'd planned to happen afterwards actually makes any sense whatsoever, or do I now go in a slightly different direction to it.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you find, because I think I've always looked at, writing novels being quite a solitary thing, but then I'd imagine compared to stand-up, it's actually more collaborative because you do have edits and you've got editorial assistants. And how are you finding that side of it?
it's I don't mind that because it's quite remote, and I'm not away all the time, which I was with stand up. The stand up is a really, you know, you're writing on your own, you're traveling to the gigs on your own, you're going on stage on your own, and then after the gig you're going back to your hotel room on your own. It's quite it can be quite a brutal process, stand up, especially if you've had a bad gig, because that's just going to stay with you. Whereas I've really enjoyed being part of the writing community, in a sense that when I first did stand up, like I said, I didn't see myself as a natural performer. For years there was a kind of imposter syndrome with me, that I felt that at some point someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and just go, "All right, come on, son, you've had a good run, but you know you're not supposed to be here. It's time you left." Whereas with the writing, I went to Harrogate this year and was a late replacement for a panel show, and it was just a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that stand up isn't a supportive industry. Mm-hmm. It can be, and I've got lots of really, really good friends in stand up, but there was I didn't feel like I had the imposter thing with the writing. Yeah. Maybe because I've wanted it so long. Maybe that plays a part. I don't know.
You're probably the first guest that doesn't have that imposter syndrome.
I mean, you know how these things work. Now, I might wake up tomorrow morning going, "What the hell am I doing? Why I can't do this?"
And because we talked earlier about feedback, and obviously as a stand-up you're getting feedback immediately. I mean, do you show your drafts or whatever do you have some beta readers, or do you just show it to your wife, or how
I just show it to my wife? Yeah. I show it to my wife, which has caused problems in the past because with the cozies, obviously Richard is a middle-aged Englishman who runs a B&B, but his wife's just left him when this incredibly exotic French woman lands on his doorstep. And I showed this to my wife, and I was really proud of this kind of first draft. She just looked at me and she said, "This is just your fantasy, isn't it? It's outrageous." But unfortunately, she really likes Lombard as a character as well. She thinks there's more of me in that, because obviously being a stand-up is very much not knockabout all the time. I don't walk around with a spinning bow tie. There are serious sides to everybody, and I think that's more me then.
Mm-hmm. And now that you're firmly embedded in terms of novel writing, is this where you want to be? You don't want to go back, or are you still one foot in the stand-up camp, or would you rather be novel writing all the time?
No, novel writing all the time, really. And the thing is, because I just remembered something, that I first came to this area as an 18-year-old in 1990 with Natalie, my wife. She was my girlfriend then, and I just fell in love with the area. And I just said, I remember sitting in a garden of a gîte near here and just saying, "I just want to retire here and write light, undemanding comic novels." So it's really all I've ever wanted. I don't need any more than that.
Yeah,
there's something about writing. The thing about the difference with stand-up and publishing books is that the stand-up is so ephemeral. It's just gone. It's straight. Once you said it, it's gone. I feel like I've created something now that is physically there. I feel like I'm, kind of, when my dad said, "Get a trade," I've got a trade, I mean, and the thing about books as well is, when I was on the road a lot and feeling really quite miserable at times being away, I would go into Waterstones and see my 2 memoir books in Waterstones and just kind of pathetically stroke them as if it's heartwarming that I can do this as well. I don't have to be going out on stage in front of drunks every night.
And obviously, you to go full circle, you kind of started off wanting to break into the screen world, and now you've kind of gone to the book side of things, would you ever want to maybe adapt some stuff for TV, for different mediums?
No, I don't think that's my strength. I mean, the cozies have been sold; they are being adapted by the same people who make MC Agatha Raisin.
All right, yeah.
So there is that in the pipeline, but I wouldn't necessarily want to be involved in the script side of things of that. I much prefer the flow of prose rather than the script. I think I'd find it too stop and starty, and it's not how I like to write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what is next after The Man Who Didn't Burn? You said you're working on the second one. Have you got ideas for the third one as well, or?
Not at the moment. After I've finished, and I have got, there are some things I've taken some notes. But after I finish the second Lombard, I'm on to the fifth Follet Valley. I've written the fourth already, so that's Death of the Jardin is coming out next June, but I have to write the fifth one in that series which is June 25.
Yeah, long lead times.
I've got a kind of calendar that the publisher sent me that takes me up until I think it's August 2026.
Wow. Okay.
Which is a lovely position to be in, but also slightly daunting.
Yes.
But do you enjoy now that you've sort of established yourself in these? Do you enjoy sort of having the sort of turnabout between the cozy stuff and the slightly more serious stuff as well?
Well, I haven't done it the other way around yet. I really struggled initially when I started the second Lombard, having come straight out of writing the cozy. I just wasn't in the right frame of mind, and I should have taken a longer break than I did. Mm-hmm. So it was difficult to get started properly. Going the other way, I don't know. It may be a relief. I really don't know at the moment. I mean, it's largely mapped out in my head, so it shouldn't be too difficult. But I honestly don't know. I don't know how that will work. I don't even know when yet. I think it's going to be around December time, and I'll have to dive into that. But we'll see. Yeah. If it's too difficult, then I'm trying to. At the moment, I'm trying to always beat my deadlines if I can, so I can then take some time off to just to completely cleanse myself really and start again.
I mean, it does sound like you've kind of found this really happy niche area that you're, of a kind of career writing specific type of books, etc., that you're, really pleased with, and which is quite nice to hear.
It's like I said, it comes back to what I always wanted to be. I wanted to retire to France at the age of 18 and write light, undemanding comic novels. I mean, my own laziness has delayed it by 30 odd years, but
you made it in the end.
I made it in the end, and so I'm exactly where I wanted to be, and I enjoy the work, and as long as I'm enjoying it, and as long as people are buying the books, then this is as I don't need any more than that.
Yeah. What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, I finished at the weekend, and it's not out until next March. It's called The Kellerby Code by Johnny Sweet. Okay. And it was really good. It was, I get sent a lot of stuff to read, and it's of varying degrees of quality. Can I say that? But this is really good. It's a real kind of dissection of privilege in the UK and how it affects people, and it's very, very good. Very good thriller.
Nice. Cool. What about the last film that you watched?
I don't remember the last film I watched. As a family, we're watching Only Murders in the Building. Which absolutely love that.
Yeah.
But the last film we were going to go and see the new Branagh Poirot, but we didn't get around to it in the end. I can't remember what happened. Probably the last film I watched, which is a film I watch probably about 4 times a week, is Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn.
Excellent.
Absolutely love that film.
Is that the new series of Only Murders that you're watching at the
Yeah.
moment?
Yeah. We're
Is it
we're
as good
bang
as
up
the
to
other
date
ones?
now.
Because I've not started that one yet.
It's not as funny as the first one, but just the acting and the timing are just superb. I mean, and Meryl Streep's in it, and it's just
That's a great cast they've got for this final season.
Oh, it's amazing! It's just amazing, and it's real comfort viewing.
Yeah,
it's the best thing Steve Martin has done in a long, long time.
Yeah, definitely,
absolutely true. Well, the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and there's obviously there's no right answer here apart from perhaps one of them, but we'll start off with cozy crime or serious crime writing.
I'm going to say serious for now.
Cool. TV or cinema?
Oh, TV. There's fewer people.
Yeah, I forgot you don't want to leave the house.
Yeah, exactly. Night owl or early bird?
Early bird now. I was always a night owl for most of my life, but I'm definitely an early bird now. It's an age thing, I think.
Music or no music when you're writing?
Oh, music. I like music, just softly in the background. Yeah.
And last one, real book or ebook?
Real book. I mean, I love Kindles are a fantastic thing, and when I was traveling all the time, it was great to just take a Kindle away with you. But there's nothing, you can't beat a real book.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's incorrect. The correct answer is
Okay.
ebook.
Is that right? I remember I was on a plane once. I can't remember where I was coming back from, some gig somewhere, and this was probably quite early in Kindle history. And this guy said, "So what have you got on your Kindle?" Like, it's none of your business. Do you know what I mean? It's none of your business. And I think I said, "Well, and he was just like, "Oh, that's rubbish. What are you doing?"
You would never go up to someone reading a book and say that's crap. By the way,
no, exactly. And the idea that you would be confrontational on a plane over a Kindle was just an absurd situation.
Well, thanks very much to Ian for coming on. I really appreciate him taking the time to come on to the podcast. And I thought it was a good chat about cozy crime, which is one of the darlings of the publishing industry, I suppose, at the moment. Richard Osman obviously is out there leading the pack. But as you mentioned, there is this sort of trend that, all these books have similar covers, even Ian's books, not The Man Who Didn't Burn, because that's a darker book, but his other books, Death and Croissants and so on, have similar covers to the likes of Richard Osman. And it's funny how trends like that can catch on in terms of the publishers, even though the books can be quite different. As you mentioned, Janice Hallett's books look like that, but they're very different.
They're not really cozy crime, exactly. Yeah. It's I guess it shows again the kind of marketing drive to have everything in a neat box, isn't it? And just have a neat package. You can just show to someone, this is what it is, label it something, put the same kind of cover, the same kind of, even the font, it's amazing how similar these ones look.
As Ian says, I suppose it's like they just want people to walk into a bookshop, see the cover and pick it, go and buy it, because they assume it's going to be the same type of book.
And I guess if you love cozy crime, then it's an easy flag to say this is cozy crime. And if you like this, you'll like that. And, obviously it works because these things sell. His books are selling like hotcakes.
But
like
also
croissants.
interesting that he's getting the opportunity now to do the darker stuff as well, and being able to do, both is something that I think a lot of crime authors would be quite jealous of, because often, as we've spoken to other guests about, you can get sort of pigeonholed in one area, absolutely. And it's hard to move out of that. No, he's done a really good job. As he says, he is living in France, making a living off writing two very different types of crime novels that he's enjoying. It's fantastic. Yeah,
very jealous of the guy.
Yeah, exactly. He's cracked it. He's cracked
it. Yeah.
So thanks very much to Ian for coming on. And The Man Who Didn't Burn. We'll put links for that in the podcast description, so you can pick that one up. But next week we've got another great guest who has had a very interesting array of encounters with people such as George Clooney, who was her neighbour. at one point.
I know. I mean, yeah. So we're chatting with the wonderful Susan Lewis next week, who she started off in TV, working as a secretary, and then worked her way up to become a production assistant. So really, a really proper. I don't know if rags to riches is the correct term, but that kind of going in the ground level and working your way up
putting
the
in
ladder,
hard,
putting the graft in. Yeah,
exactly.
And as you say, she's lived in LA. I mean, she lived next to George Clooney. She met Nicolas Cage, Steve Martin. I mean,
yeah,
another person I'm very jealous of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we chat to her about her career, because she's also written a lot of books as well.
Yes,
so
more importantly, she's also written books.
Yeah,
so
that's why she's on the podcast. It wasn't just for celebrity anecdotes. Yeah. Although we tried to get those as well. Please do tune in for that episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app. That always helps.
And of course, if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or drop us a message on social media. We are on pretty much everything out there. Search for us at UK Page One, unless, of course, you're looking on Mastodon, in which case we are writing.exchange/@page1pod.
I don't think anyone is looking for us on Mastodon.
What is Mastodon?
Let's be honest. But have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.